Imagine for a moment that the invisible scaffolding of our entire world, like the modern political systems we completely rely on, the nation states we live in, the democratic processes we participate in with just absolute certainty.
Right?
What if none of that is actually a logical framework of governance? I mean, what if instead you were asked to step outside everything you know and view all of it as an elaborate, mechanical, and entirely man-made religion?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a huge shift.
Right. A completely synthetic belief system that is actively and maybe somewhat hopelessly competing against the actual laws of physics. So, welcome to the deep dive. We are super thrilled you're here with us today because we are looking at a stack of sources that just completely upends the conventional way we think about authority, law, and really reality itself.
It genuinely does. It forces this perspective shift that is incredibly hard to shake once you finally see it.
Mhm.
Because we were looking at a deeply complex, highly theological, and just structurally rigorous set of documents today.
Yeah, heavy stuff.
It's very heavy. Essentially, what these texts are doing is performing this relentless technical audit on global governance frameworks. And the contrast these documents draw is just incredibly stark.
How so?
Well, on one side of the ledger, you have what the sources describe as an absolute systemic reality, like a baseline of universal constants that just cannot be bargained with.
Okay, the physics side of things.
Exactly. And on the other side, you have the modern secular nation state, which the texts analyze not as some, peak evolution of human politics, but quite literally as a structural engineering failure.
Man. Now, a quick heads up for you listening as we jump in, because these sources pull absolutely no punches.
They really don't.
No, they don't. The material we are unpacking today contains highly politically and, well, religiously charged viewpoints. These texts offer a profound, unsparing critique of secularism, of democracy, and of Western political structures.
And at the same time, they're asserting Islamic governance, specifically a deeply structural interpretation of it as the sole objective truth.
Right. So, to be absolutely clear here, our role today is not to endorse, validate, or take sides on like any of these viewpoints.
No.
We are not advocating for one system over another or telling you what to believe.
Definitely not.
Our mission today is purely analytical. We are acting as your guides to basically take apart this conceptual engine and show you how these texts argue it works. We're looking at the fascinating structural, mathematical, and mechanical blueprints they present, and we're going to explore them objectively.
I think that's the perfect way to frame it. I mean, we really have to treat this as an exploration of a very specific, almost architectural framework. We're dissecting the internal logic of the argument itself.
Exactly.
What's so unique about this source material is how the authors construct their case. They don't just rely on theology. They use engineering metaphors, legal audits, and mathematical proof to deconstruct modern society.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to journey from the very foundation of reality, as defined by these texts, exploring this wild, synthesized concept they call the country-state flag god idol.
It's quite a term.
It really is. Then we'll break down a mathematical critique they call the democracy of zeros. And finally, we'll look at the ultimate litmus tests they propose for a truly functional society.
So to really grasp the gravity of the argument being made here, we have to start exactly where the documents start, which is their baseline definition of reality.
Right, setting the stage.
Exactly. In these texts, that absolute baseline is always referred to as Deen-e-Fitrat or Deen-e-Islam. Now, we need to immediately strip away the modern secular baggage associated with the word religion.
Because normally when we hear religion, we think of like a personal belief.
Right. In the modern world, we tend to think of religion as this private, subjective set of beliefs, something you feel in your heart, completely separate from how a bridge is built or how an economy runs.
Yeah, totally decoupled from the nuts and bolts of the world.
But the texts argue vehemently against that separation. They state that Deen-e-Fitrat, or Deen-e-Islam, is an absolute, unchangeable physical fact.
So we're not talking about a moral preference here at all. The sources literally compare it to gravity or thermodynamics.
They do. They frame it as the natural law of the cosmos.
Yeah.
The text cites Surah 30.33 from the Quran, which essentially states that the inherent nature of Allah, upon which he has created human beings and the universe, never changes.
There's no altering it.
Not at all. There is no altering the creation of God. And the core characteristic of this natural law, this Deen-e-Fitrat, is that it inherently and inevitably goes toward unity.
Unity.
Think about it from a physics perspective. Nature seeks maximum efficiency, and therefore it seeks unity. It ruthlessly avoids duplication, friction, and waste, whether you are looking at the subatomic level, planetary orbits, or ideally human organization.
Let me just make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. In this framework, the fact that gravity pulls matter together into spheres, or the fact that biological ecosystems rely on this perfectly unified, interdependent balance, that's all Deen-e-Fitrat.
Yes, exactly.
And human society, if it were actually following the laws of nature instead of fighting them, would also have to operate as a single, unified, frictionless whole.
That is the central assertion, yeah. Deen-e-Fitrat is presented as the foundational operating system of the universe. And the texts argue that attempting to bypass these natural laws through, man-made political divisions, borders, and artificial legislation, it's not just a moral failing.
It's structurally insane.
Exactly. It is structurally insane. They use a very grounding analogy. They say it's like putting a cart before a horse, tying it down, and then sitting there expecting divine intervention to make the cart move forward.
Just completely fighting the physics of the situation.
Right. You're working actively against the fundamental physics of reality and wondering why you aren't making any progress.
Which introduces a really fascinating distinction the texts make regarding how human beings interact with this reality, specifically regarding knowledge.
Right, because even if Deen-e-Fitrat is the natural law, human beings still have to invent things.
Right.
We have to build societies, cure diseases.
The texts don't deny that. Instead, they divide human understanding into two distinct categories. They call them revealed knowledge and acquired knowledge.
This distinction is so vital for understanding the rest of their argument. Revealed knowledge refers to those unchangeable constants. The software, essentially.
Core programming.
Exactly. It's the divine principles of morality, justice, and the purpose of existence that absolutely cannot be altered. Acquired knowledge, on the other hand, is defined as the technical hardware of society.
So like the physical tools we use.
Yeah, it encompasses the scientific method, technological innovation, the building of spacecraft, medical advancements, and crucially, it includes the operational mechanics of statecraft.
The actual administrative logistics of running a society.
Exactly, the administrative side.
And the key here is that acquired knowledge is neutral, right? Like a hammer doesn't have a moral compass.
Well, to put it in the terms of the text, acquired knowledge is the engine. It has immense power, but zero inherent ideology.
So it can be used for anything.
Right. Whether the outcome of this acquired knowledge results in the betterment of humanity or the total destruction of it depends entirely on the ideology that directs it.
Which would be the revealed knowledge.
Exactly. The revealed knowledge, or the lack thereof, is what steers the hardware.
This actually brings us to a quote in the sources from Dr. Iqbal that, honestly, it completely stopped me in my tracks.
Oh, the Iqbal quote, yeah.
It feels like a massive contradiction at first. The text notes that Dr. Iqbal famously stated, "The inner core of the present Western civilization is purely Quranic."
That's a bold statement.
Right. Hold on, rewind that. Given the intense critique of secular Western systems throughout these entire texts, hearing that the core of Western civilization is, quote, purely Quranic, unquote, sounds totally backwards. Am I missing something here?
No, I mean, it sounds incredibly counterintuitive, and that cognitive dissonance is exactly why the texts are so surgically precise in how they unpack Iqbal's observation.
Okay, so break it down for me.
This statement is specifically and strictly about acquired knowledge. What Dr. Iqbal is observing, and what the texts are validating, is that the structural, scientific, and empirical discipline utilized by the West to achieve its massive technological and developmental success perfectly aligns with the Quranic principles of utilizing nature.
Ah, I see. So it's a technical complement, not a moral one.
A purely technical complement. The Quran repeatedly commands humanity to observe the stars, understand the earth, and harness the laws of nature.
So they're just following instructions, basically.
In a way, yes. The West's mastery of the hardware of the universe, their physics, their engineering, their rigorous scientific inquiry is inherently aligned with those natural laws established by the Creator.
That makes a lot of sense.
When a Western engineer builds a functioning jet engine, they are strictly obeying the divine constants of thermodynamics and aerodynamics. It is not an endorsement of their underlying secular political ideology. It is a profound acknowledgement of their mastery of acquired knowledge.
I see. So to use a modern software analogy, Dr. Iqbal is essentially saying the West has built the most incredible high-performance servers and processors the world has ever seen.
Yes, great analogy.
The hardware is objectively flawless because it obeys the laws of physics perfectly. But wait, if the West is succeeding so brilliantly at hardware level, where does the text say the global system crashes? If the servers are running so well, why is the overall network considered a failure?
The crash happens when human beings take that brilliant mastery of hardware and attempt to rewrite the root software of the universe.
Oh, you can't rewrite the root software.
Exactly. The texts argue that while modern society meticulously obeys the laws of physics to build an airplane or a microchip, they turn around and attempt to invent entirely new artificial laws to govern human behavior, economics, and societal structure.
They just ignore the principles when it suits them.
Right, they ignore the principles of Deen-e-Fitrat when it comes to morality and justice. And the mechanical reality is, when you try to override unchangeable divine constants, the system simply rejects it.
Because you can't naturally change a constant.
You can. So, to force the new software to run, humanity is forced to invent massive artificial bypass systems.
Which introduces the whole concept of structural impossibility. If you don't have the administrative privileges to change the software, you basically have to build a counterfeit authority.
Exactly.
The texts present this as a mechanical logical proof to explain exactly why secular governance is fundamentally structurally flawed right at its root.
The logic here is brilliantly straightforward if you look at it through the lens of a structural engineer. The texts argue that divine laws, whether that is absolute moral justice or the explicit prohibition of certain exploitative economic practices like usury, are structural constants of the cosmos.
They hold the exact same weight as the laws of physics.
Yes. Now, the logical proof is this. To change an unchangeable constant, a system or an entity must possess an equal or higher baseline authority than the entity that originally established the constant.
Think about that for a second. If I, as a citizen, want to rewrite the law of gravity so that I can just, float to work, I need to possess authority over the fabric of space-time itself.
Right, which you don't.
I don't. I can't just write a sticky note, put it on my door, and declare gravity invalid today.
That is the exact scale of the problem the texts are highlighting.
Yeah.
Because human beings do not inherently possess this baseline universal authority.
Yeah.
I mean, we are created beings within the system, not the architects of it. We face a massive mechanical problem when we want to deviate from the blueprint.
How do you bypass it?
Well, how do you pass a human law that directly contradicts a divine constant when you fundamentally lack the authority to do so?
You can't do it naturally.
We cannot do it naturally. Therefore, human beings are forced to build an artificial, multi-tiered mechanical apparatus to bypass objective reality.
A counterfeit system.
Right. If you want to pass a law that the Creator has forbidden, you cannot pass it in your own name, because everyone knows you have no authority. You have to invent a counterfeit sovereign entity that people believe actually does have the authority.
And this counterfeit entity, this fabricated sovereign, is defined in the texts by a very specific and, frankly, a very clunky term.
It is a bit of a mouthful.
The sources insist we must treat this as a single, indivisible concept. They call it the country-state flag god idol.
Yes.
Okay, ELI 5 time. Explain it like I'm 5. Because compound analytical unit sounds like a piece of lab equipment from a chemistry textbook. What does this actually mean in the context of a nation-state?
It is a deliberate mouthful, honestly, because the authors want you to see the composite nature of the illusion. When they call it a compound analytical unit, they are saying you cannot separate the ingredients without completely breaking the spell.
What are the ingredients?
It synthesizes 3 distinct things. You have geographical divisions, which are the borders. You have symbolic fabrics, which is the flag. And you have spiritual devotion, which is the unquestioning loyalty of the citizen.
So it all gets mashed together.
Exactly. The text argues that in the secular framework, you cannot separate the flag from the state, nor can you separate the state from the concept of a false deity. They function as a single combined idol.
But why is this massive psychological synthesis actually necessary? Like, why go through all the trouble of inventing this country-state flag god idol?
It comes down to the theological and mechanical necessity of needing a loophole.
A loophole for the laws of physics.
Basically, according to the text, a law is ever living, has no physical symbol or idol, and is the absolute creator, ruler, and owner of the land. Therefore, the true, objective law of the land naturally exists only in his name. But let's say a group of humans, like a parliament or an elite class, wants to implement a law that directly goes against the Quran. For instance, they want to legalize interest-based banking to consolidate wealth, or they want to introduce new social behaviors that natural law prohibits.
They can't just stand up and say, we, the politicians, decree that God is wrong and we are right, I mean, that would be instantly rejected. The baseline authority just isn't there.
Like they'd be laughed out of the room.
Yeah.
And because the text cites Surah 18.26, which states that Allah does not let anyone share in his command, there is no legitimate power-sharing agreement to be found.
No divine cosign.
None. So an artificial entity must be introduced to act as a substitute sovereign. Enter the country-state flag god idol.
Wow.
By inventing this completely intangible concept of the sovereign nation-state and anchoring it in reality with a physical flag, human leaders create a legal and psychological proxy.
Oh, I see where this is going.
When they pass a man-made law that violates natural law, they aren't passing it in their own names, which would be transparently illegitimate, and they certainly aren't passing it in the Creator's name.
They are passing laws in the name of the nation.
Exactly. They pass it in the name of the country-state flag god idol.
It's just a massive planetary-scale psychological projection. They are creating a vessel of authority entirely out of thin air so they can hide their own total lack of authority behind it.
That's a perfect way to summarize it.
But, I mean, setting that up is one thing. Operationalizing it is another entirely. How do you actually trick billions of people into treating a legal abstraction like literally a line drawn on a map by dead people centuries ago as if it were a literal supreme authority deserving of their absolute obedience?
To execute that level of mass cognitive reprogramming, the texts argue you need some serious infrastructure. They introduce what they call the mechanical trinity of Deen-e-Secularism.
The mechanical trinity. So this is the actual deployment mechanism of the bypass system.
Exactly. It's the structural rollout of the idol. The texts lay out a sequential four-part structural machinery. It moves from the state to the constitution to the flag to Taghut.
Okay, let's trace how this machinery operates on the human mind and the legal system, because this is fascinating. So the foundation is the state, but the state isn't a physical thing you can touch, right?
No, not at all. The state is defined strictly as an intangible abstraction. In the theological terms of the text, it is the false god itself.
Because we need a sovereign.
Right. Because human logic, if left alone, cannot naturally claim absolute sovereignty over a planet it didn't create. So the system must invent an invisible legal abstraction, the concept of the sovereign nation, and artificially crown it as the ultimate authority over a specific patch of dirt.
But an invisible abstraction can't tell you what to do. I mean, it needs a voice, or at least a rule book, which leads to the second component, the Constitution.
The Constitution operates as the holy book of this new idol. It is the sacred, untouchable text of the secular system.
The holy text of the state.
Yes. The sources argue that its primary function is to formalize draconian principles and bypass divine law under a false veneer of rationality and consensus.
And it does that by making it look official.
Exactly. Crucially, the texts point out that through the mechanism of the Constitution, literally any law can be added, modified, or removed in direct contradiction to the Quran.
Anything at all.
Anything. The system can introduce riba, which is interest, and usury, or fundamentally alter family and social structures. And it's all validated because it's done quote-unquote constitutionally in the name of the country-state flag god idol.
I want to inject a modern analogy here because thinking about the Constitution this way is just wild.
Go for it.
It feels very much like a modern end-user license agreement. You know, a EULA for a piece of software.
Oh, that's a brilliant comparison.
Right, like those 50-page documents full of legal jargon that pop up when you install an app. You didn't write it, you don't actually agree with everything in it, and you certainly never sat down and negotiated the terms with the developers.
Well, you have to click it anyway.
You are forced to click agree just to exist in the digital ecosystem. If you don't click it, you can't use your phone. The Constitution acts like a compulsory EULA for living on a specific piece of geography.
That is an incredibly apt analogy for the text's argument. It is an enforced compliance document that claims to be a consensual contract.
Exactly.
But let's look at the third piece of the machinery. We have the invisible state, and we have its rulebook, the Constitution. But human psychology requires a focal point. An intangible state cannot be seen, and it is very difficult to direct emotional, visceral devotion toward a 50-page legal document.
Right. I mean, you can't salute a concept. It doesn't trigger that emotional response.
Exactly. There is a universal historical rule recognized in this framework. There is no false god without a physical idol. Humanity always needs a golden calf.
Ah, so they need something to look at.
So the system introduces a physical piece of fabric, The flag.
The flag.
The flag serves as the material anchor. It's the tangible idol for individuals to honor, to salute, to pledge allegiance to, and most importantly, to worship.
Worship. That's a strong word.
It is, and it's crucial to note how the texts define worship here. They don't just mean bowing down on your knees. They define worship as obeying out of love and ultimate reverence.
Obeying out of love. Wow. Which brings us to the final piece of the machine, takhut. And again, this is a heavy theological term. How does takhut fit into the state, the Constitution, and the flag?
Takhut represents the operational mouthpiece, the secular lawgiver. Think about it mechanically. A piece of fabric is silent.
It can't tell you what the tax rate is.
Exactly. A flag cannot speak, it cannot write legislation, and it cannot enforce taxes. Therefore, the system requires a priesthood.
The politicians.
Yes. Secular politicians, parliaments, and legislators step into this role to act as the physical voice of the silent idol. They pass man-made laws, but they aggressively pretend that the authority to do so stems from the country-state flag god idol.
Not from themselves.
Right. By acting as the voice of the state, takhut claims the baseline authority to supersede divine law.
I am absolutely fascinated by how the texts illustrate this psychological manipulation. To make this abstract mechanical trinity feel visceral, the sources provide a really vivid and almost shocking analogy. They call it the stray dog paradigm.
It's an intense metaphor.
Let's walk through this because it takes all this high-level political theory and grounds it in a deeply relatable, slightly uncomfortable story.
It's one of the most powerful diagnostic tools in the documents. Let's hear it.
Okay, so imagine you were walking down a dusty road in a village, and you see that a stray dog has died on the side of the street. It's a mundane, somewhat sad, but entirely ordinary event.
Right, nothing supernatural about it.
Now imagine a savvy, manipulative person comes along, they see the dead dog, but instead of clearing it away, they place a wooden stick over the carcass. Then they drape an ornate piece of rag or fabric over the stick.
They dress it up.
Exactly. Suddenly, they start ringing a bell and announce to the village that this mound is actually the resting place of a highly respected ancient saint.
They create a narrative.
They tell the public to bring their devotion, to leave their money as offerings, and they promise that if you show enough reverence to this spot, your worldly wishes will be granted.
What the texts are highlighting here is the terrifying ease with which an illusion of sanctity can be engineered out of absolutely nothing.
It's literally just a dead dog under there.
Right. You take something entirely mundane in this metaphor, something objectively impure, like a dead stray dog. You cover it with a manufactured symbol, and you successfully harvest the spiritual and material devotion of the masses.
And the leap the texts make from that village street to the global geopolitical stage is brutal.
It really pulls no punches.
They argue that the global elite, the architects of the modern secular world, who the texts sometimes refer to as the predator elite, use this exact, identical psychological blueprint.
Identical.
They take an arbitrary, completely artificial geographic division of land, like a line drawn by colonial powers or conquerors. They drop a manufactured piece of fabric on it, the flag, and then they demand that the masses revere it as sacred.
The parallel is absolute. The elite demand that people sacrifice their wealth through taxation, and far more disturbingly, they demand that people go to war, kill, and die for this artificial idol.
They want you to die for the rag over the stick.
Yes. They demand that the masses treat the country-state flag god idol with the absolute, unquestioning devotion that, according to Deen-e-Fitrat, should only be reserved for the ever-living creator.
The cognitive dissonance of nationalism is just laid bare here. The texts are explicit that the global system tricks the masses into dying for a piece of colored fabric as if they were dying for the creator of the universe.
It's a profound deception.
And how does the system reinforce this? By rewarding those who die for the idol with the title of hero of the land. They give them medals, they fold the flag over their casket, constantly validating the false religion.
The sources don't mince words about the theological weight of this. They argue it is the worst possible form of shirk.
Which means?
Which in Islamic theology means associating partners with God. But in this context, it's not even associating a partner. It's entirely replacing the worship and obedience owed to the Creator with the worship and obedience to an artificial geographic idol managed by takhut.
Okay, if this entire mechanical trinity, the state, the constitution, the flag, the politicians, is an engineered fiction, like a massive magic trick played on the masses, how do they legally justify it?
They have to come up with something.
Right, they can't just say, oh, we made it up. The texts argue that to validate this system, Secular governance has to rely on a fundamentally flawed mathematical premise. They call this premise the democracy of zeros.
This is where the structural audit becomes a purely mathematical critique of democratic systems. Earlier, we discussed the zero authority principle.
Right, about not being able to change gravity.
Yes. If a true functional system must rely on absolute truths, like the equation 1 + 1 = 2, then we must rigorously examine the mathematics of democracy. In a secular democratic framework, the ultimate foundational claim is that sovereignty resides inherently within the people.
Right. We the people, it's the rallying cry of every modern republic, the idea that authority bubbles up from the bottom.
But let's apply the engineering logic of the text to we the people. From this structural perspective, no single human individual inherently possesses the natural right, the baseline authority, or the cosmological capacity to alter the core constants of nature or divine law.
Going back to our gravity example, if I am one individual, I possess exactly 0% of the authority required to turn off gravity.
Exactly zero.
I also possess exactly 0% of the authority required to declare that usury, which is structurally prohibited by the Creator, is now suddenly morally and legally acceptable. My personal authority value on these fundamental constants is a flat zero.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You possess a mathematical value of zero authority. So what happens when a democratic system asks you to go to the ballot box to elect a representative who will legislate these realities?
What happens?
This is where the texts identify the addition error. The fundamental rule of delegation is that you cannot delegate a power you do not personally possess. An entity cannot distribute an asset it does not own.
That makes total sense. If my bank account has $0 in it, I can't write you a check for $1 million and tell you to go buy a house. The check will bounce.
Exactly. The math doesn't lie. So if one citizen has zero authority to override natural law and another citizen has zero authority, putting them together in a voting booth doesn't spontaneously generate authority out of the ether.
0 + 0 is 0.
0 + 0 + 0 + 0 will always eternally equal 0. The texts argue that no matter how many millions or billions of people vote in an election, aggregating human numbers cannot fundamentally manufacture structural authority. The math is just a delusion.
I want to play devil's advocate here because this is a really tough pill for modern sensibilities to swallow.
Sure, let's hear it.
I hear the math. I understand that 0 + 0 = 0. But surely a society of 300 million people agreeing on a constitution, agreeing not to kill each other, agreeing on trade laws, doesn't that collective bargaining hold practical, functional weight?
It's a common defense.
Right. Like, even if it's not cosmic authority, doesn't the sheer consensus make the system functional?
It's a crucial pushback, and the texts fully anticipate this defensive consensus. The counterargument is that practical agreement or consensus among humans never possesses the power to change physical, structural reality.
Okay, give me an example.
Let me put it in engineering terms. Suppose you have a wooden bridge spanning a gorge. The structural limits of the wood dictate it can safely hold 10,000 pounds.
That's the physical limit.
Right. Now suppose 300 million people hold a democratic vote, and they unanimously reach a consensus that the wooden bridge can hold a 100,000-pound freight train. They write a constitution declaring the bridge is safe for trains. They salute a flag on the bridge.
So the consensus is absolute, everyone agrees.
The consensus is absolute. But when the 100,000-pound train attempts to cross, the bridge will shatter and the train will fall into the gorge, regardless of the 300 million votes.
Because the physics don't care about the votes.
The unyielding laws of physics dictate the outcome, not the emotional or political agreement of the masses. The texts argue that human societies operate exactly like that bridge. You cannot vote away the structural load-bearing requirements of human morality and economics established by Deen-e-Fitrat.
That is a devastating refutation. It completely strips all the romanticism out of the democratic process and just reduces it to a physical impossibility.
It really does.
And it leads to why the texts are so harsh on the concept of blending these systems. They explicitly state that the phrase Islamic democracy is a total oxymoron.
They view it as a complete contradiction in terms. Structurally, they say Islamic democracy is as illogical as saying Islamic taqut.
Because the foundations are incompatible.
You cannot merge a framework based on acknowledging absolute, unchangeable divine constants with a framework built on the mathematical delusion that aggregating zeros can spontaneously manufacture the authority to override those constants. It creates what the texts describe as the delegation paradox and a massive legal vacuum.
Let's pull on that thread of the legal vacuum, specifically looking back at the Constitution through this mathematical lens. Because if the people have zero authority, then the document they supposedly authorize must also have zero authority.
This is where the legal audit gets incredibly granular. From a strict contractual perspective, the texts argue that a modern secular constitution carries exactly zero legal weight.
Why zero?
Because to have a valid, binding contract in reality, you require a signed agreement between living, consenting parties. A constitution, however, completely fails this basic legal standard.
Going back to the EULA analogy, we are forced into a contract we never saw being drafted.
Exactly. A constitution is fundamentally an unsigned document. It is typically written by a group of founders who have been dead for centuries.
Dead people's rules.
Right. It is then forcefully applied and enforced onto a living population who never signed it, never explicitly consented to it, and are often punished if they attempt to secede from it. It exposes the entire legal framework as a manufactured, enforced story rather than a legitimate structural reality.
But wait, if the underlying math is a zero and the foundational legal document is a void contract, how on earth does the system sustain itself day to day?
That is the million-dollar question.
Why don't people wake up, realize the bridge can't hold the train, and just walk away?
Because the system demands the adoption of what the texts call a cult posture.
The cult posture.
To maintain the illusion of the mechanical trinity, the system must short-circuit the intellectual faculties of its citizens. When political leaders ask the public to sacrifice their lives in war or surrender their wealth or accept moral decay for the sake of the country-state flag god idol, the people are expected and trained to respond entirely without critical thought.
The texts describe this process almost like a form of dark magic. They say it actively separates wisdom from the soul, or the Ruh. You are structurally forced to shut down the part of your brain that seeks absolute truth.
You're conditioned to become a blind follower. The texts quote the Quran to illustrate this exact psychological trap, describing those who say, "We have found our fathers on a certain way and we are on their footprints."
Just blindly following the path.
It is the ultimate anti-intellectual stance. It demands you abandon the rigorous logic of Deen-e-Fitrat and instead emotionally attach your identity, your worth, and your morality to an artificial geographic idol simply because you happen to be born within its arbitrary borders.
Okay, but if the foundation is built on this counterfeit math and the citizens are kept in a cult posture to sustain it, eventually the reality of the physics has to assert itself, right? The bridge has to break.
Oh, it does.
And the texts argue that we don't have to wait for a philosophical debate to see this break. We can literally look out the window. They claim the failure of these systems is physically verifiable in the real world through empirical proofs and systemic diagnostics.
They use another highly practical analogy here, the societal airplane metaphor. The texts argue that a human society is not a loose collection of ideas. It operates as a highly complex technical machine, identical to an advanced commercial aircraft.
Okay, I like this.
When a team of engineers designs an airplane, they do not hold a focus group to ask the public how lift should work. They do not hold a democratic vote to decide the principles of aerodynamics.
Right. They rigorously discover and then strictly obey the unyielding laws of physics. If a politician steps into the hangar and says, "Hey, my constituents think the wing should be half the size because it looks sleeker and saves money," the engineers don't compromise.
They can't compromise.
Because if they accommodate popular opinion over the laws of physics, the plane will inevitably crash.
Exactly. The societal equivalent of that plane crash is what the Quranic terminology in the texts refers to as fasad.
Fasad.
Fasad translates to acute societal chaos, corruption, or degradation. We see it empirically as runaway economic inflation, massive and cruel wealth disparity, the collapse of family structures, and severe environmental decay.
I think it's vital to clarify how the texts view facade here, because it's so easy in religious discussions to view societal problems as like a lightning bolt from heaven, a magical arbitrary punishment from an angry deity because people were quote-unquote bad. But that is not what these texts are saying at all, is it?
Not in the slightest. The texts view facade entirely through the lens of structural engineering. Facade is not a magical punishment. It is the natural physical feedback loop of a poorly designed, mathematically flawed system.
It's the check engine light.
Yes. It is the check engine light on the dashboard. It is the structural plane crashing because you ignored the laws of aerodynamics. When inflation utterly ruins the purchasing power of the working class, or when societal morals collapse into violent chaos, it is the feedback loop alerting humanity that their artificial legal mechanism, the mechanical trinity they built to bypass the creator, is failing under the weight of reality.
And to prove that this failure is intrinsically tied to the system itself, the texts offer incredibly specific, real-world litmus tests. The most prominent one is what they call the riba challenge, riba being the Arabic term for interest, usury, and really the foundation of fiat banking.
This is where the text transitioned from theoretical critique to an active empirical challenge. And the challenge is brilliant in its mechanical simplicity. The authors say, try implementing an interest-based banking system, try enforcing riba as the daily operational law of the land without invoking, relying on, or hiding behind the mechanical mask of a country-state flag god idol.
Just trying to do it naturally, person to person, without the state backing you up.
Exactly. And the conclusion is that it is a total, laughable, structural impossibility.
Because nobody would agree to it.
Think about it. Without the artificial state to legally enforce debt collection, without the flag to command blind, patriotic loyalty to the central bank, and without the Constitution to provide a false legal cover that normalizes usury as finance, no human being in their right mind would naturally consent to a system explicitly designed to mathematically exploit and enslave them through compounding debt.
So the texts argue that the modern nation-state wasn't just a political evolution, it was constructed as a mandatory mechanical mask.
That's right.
The system of riba is so unnatural and so parasitic that it literally cannot survive in the open air. It requires the cult posture and the democracy of zeros just to convince people to participate in their own exploitation.
Precisely. Because the text of the Quran explicitly prohibiting riba is an unchangeable constant, the elite had to construct an artificial legal reality where violating that constant is normalized. The sheer inability of humanity to execute riba independently of this massive artificial framework proves, by negative space, that the alternative divine framework is the absolute structural truth, or haq.
This ties directly into another empirical diagnostic they offer, which is the currency litmus test. If riba is the mechanism of exploitation, fiat currency is the ammunition. To avoid systemic economic slavery, the texts state that a true society's currency must be backed by what they specifically call sunnah money.
Sunnah money refers to mediums of exchange that possess intrinsic, God-given value, primarily physical commodities like gold and silver.
Right, things that are actually worth something on their own.
Exactly. This ties right back into the mathematical argument about authority. True, objective value cannot be engineered out of absolutely nothing by human decree, just as structural authority cannot be manufactured from aggregating zeros.
So when a central bank just types $1 billion into a computer screen, or prints paper notes backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of the country-state flag god idol, the texts view that as a structural violation of reality.
It is a fundamental violation. Man-made fiat money currency generated from thin air is fundamentally haram, or forbidden in this framework, unless it is explicitly and fully pegged to intrinsic physical assets.
Because it's not real.
Right. The texts argue that only the creator has the authority and the capacity to store actual inherent value within creation. A gold coin has value because of its physical properties established by Deen-e-Fitrat. A paper dollar only has value because of the enforced illusion of the state.
The illusion.
Fiat currency, therefore, is described as the primary tool of the predatory elite. It allows them to perpetually rip off the masses, siphoning their actual labor and resources through the invisible mechanisms of inflation and compounding debt, all while hiding behind the legitimacy of the flag.
Man, okay, we've spent a lot of time analyzing the crashing airplane. We've looked at the math of zeros, the cult posture, the fiat economy. If the secular nation-state is a total structural failure, what is the alternative? I mean, what does the blueprint of a correct, functional societal airplane actually look like, according to these texts?
The texts define the proper functional operating system for human society as Deen-e-Haq. If Deen-e-Fitrat or Deen-e-Islam is the baseline natural law of the universe, the physics, then Deen-e-Haq is the active, operational axis of the Quran in human society. It is explicitly defined as the system of social justice of Islam.
And based on everything we've read in these sources, we need to be incredibly precise here. Establishing this justice system is not some mystical, passive event.
Not at all.
It's not just about everyone deciding to be nicer or reciting prayers. It requires intense logistical heavy lifting. It relies heavily on what we defined earlier as acquired knowledge.
Absolutely. The texts mandate a rigorous, unbreakable connection here. You cannot establish true social justice Deen-e hack without mastering the technical hardware.
You need the tools.
You need the engineering to build infrastructure, the administrative science to distribute resources equitably, the medical knowledge to heal the sick. It requires supreme competence in acquired knowledge. But, and this is the key, it must be directed entirely by the unchangeable principles of revealed knowledge rather than by the profit motives of a secular elite.
The standard they set for this system of DE hack is just staggering. It's not about achieving a certain GDP growth rate or having the most powerful military or landing on Mars. The texts use a very powerful, highly specific analogy. They say, in a true system of DE hack, the logistical standard of care is so absolute that, quote, even a dog should not die of thirst.
Think about the logistical mastery required to achieve that metric.
It's unbelievable.
To ensure that not even a stray animal perishes from neglect requires a society that is hyper-aware of its environment, utterly efficient in its resource management, and universally committed to the preservation of life as a divine mandate. That is the ultimate metric of success for Deen-e hack.
Total frictionless justice.
It demands absolute, comprehensive, friction-free justice down to the most vulnerable creatures in the ecosystem. And the texts argue that achieving this level of systemic efficiency is entirely impossible without true unity.
Which brings us full circle to the beginning. True unity is the exact opposite of the artificial fractured divisions created by the country-state flag god idol.
Exactly.
The texts are adamant that all human beings share a singular common origin tracing back to Adam. They explicitly state a core principle: an Arab has no inherent superiority over a non-Arab, a white person over a black person, and vice versa.
The biological and spiritual unity of the human race is a natural constant of Deen-e-Fitrat. Therefore, the country-state flag god idol doesn't just divide people by accident, it serves as the enemy's intentional primary line of defense.
To keep us apart.
By taking humanity and slicing it up with arbitrary borders, by indoctrinating people to be hyper-nationalistic and fiercely loyal to competing pieces of fabric, the secular system actively prevents the global unification of humanity. It prevents the formation of the global Ummah, which would naturally organize and thrive under the frictionless laws of nature.
We are nearing the end of this deep dive, but we have to cover what is perhaps the most compelling, mind-bending philosophical proof in this entire stack of documents. They call it the universal retrieval test.
This is my favorite part.
I want to walk you, the listener, through this thought experiment, because if you really visualize it, it crystallizes every single concept we have wrestled with today.
It is the ultimate evaluative tool. It strips away all the noise.
So imagine a catastrophic scenario tomorrow. Imagine a scenario where every single printed book, every digital archive, every server farm, every hard drive, every written historical record on the face of the earth is completely, permanently burned and destroyed. A total, instantaneous wiping of all recorded human information.
Everything is gone.
The question the texts ask you to consider is this: once the fires burn out, what actually survives? What can be objectively retrieved from the fundamental fabric of reality itself?
When you apply this test, the texts conclude that only 3 core realities are universally retrievable from the canvas of existence, simply because they do not rely on human documentation to exist. They are hard-coded into reality.
Okay, what's number 1?
Number 1 is the Quran, because even if every physical and digital copy is vaporized, it is perfectly preserved in the collective human memory. Millions of living individuals across the globe have memorized the entire text word for word. It will be written back down identically the very next day.
That is an amazing point. Okay, what's number 2?
Number 2 is statecraft, which is specifically defined in this context as the natural law of unity. Humans are social creatures bound by Deen-e-Fitrat. They will naturally reorganize, form communities, and seek efficiency, because unity and interdependence are laws of nature that do not require a textbook to function.
And number 3 is science. The unchangeable physical forces of the universe. If you burn every physics textbook, the laws of gravity, thermodynamics, and aerodynamics will still exist. The boiling point of water won't change. Give humanity enough time, and they will simply rediscover and rewrite the exact same scientific equations because the hardware of the universe is constant.
But the most devastating part of the universal retrieval test is looking at what permanently vaporizes in that fire.
What doesn't come back?
Every single secular philosophy. Every man-made constitution, the arbitrary borders drawn on maps, the very concept of specific nation-states, the country-state flag god idols. If the documents detailing them burn, they're gone forever.
You could never organically rediscover the U.S. Constitution or the borders of France by studying the laws of physics or the human memory.
You couldn't. They would be permanently erased, proving structurally that they were never fundamental realities to begin with. They were merely temporary fictions, manufactured myths that possess power only because millions of people were trained through the mechanical trinity to collectively pretend they were real.
Man. So, after unpacking all of this, what does it actually mean for us? We have gone on an absolute conceptual marathon today.
We really have.
We started at the bedrock, the unchanging thermodynamic laws of Deen-e-Fitrat and Deen-e-Islam. We explored how those laws are bypassed through the psychological engineering of the country-state flag god idol, deploying a mechanical trinity of the state, constitution, flag, and tat to enforce an illusion. We break down the devastating math of the democracy of zeros, realizing that aggregating human opinions cannot spontaneously manufacture baseline authority over natural law.
Right.
We looked at the crashing airplane of fiat economies and usury and contrasted it with the rigorous technical standard of Deen-e-Hack, where the system is only successful if not even a dog dies of thirst.
It is, without a doubt, one of the most rigorous, unsparing structural audits of the invisible systems of authority that govern every single aspect of our daily lives.
Regardless of your personal theology, regardless of what you believe about the universe, these texts offer an incredibly potent lens. They force a deeply uncomfortable but absolutely necessary audit of your own reality. They force you to pause and ask yourself, what rules do I follow today because they are objective, unchangeable facts of nature? And what rules do I submit to? What limits do I place on my own mind simply because they are written on an unsigned contract by people I've never met, enforced by the invisible abstraction of a state? Are we living in structural reality, or are we living our entire lives inside an engineered story?
I think the most powerful way to synthesize all of this complex theory is to bring it right back to that final visceral thought experiment. I want to leave you with this. If the universal retrieval test happened tomorrow morning, if the fire swept through all written human laws, all artificial borders, all bank ledgers, and all national myths, what intrinsic, unchangeable values would you personally rely on to rebuild your life? With the current societal reality, you invest so much of your identity, your time, and your belief in to survive that fire. Or would it simply disappear into the ash, exposed as the manufactured myth it might actually be?